What's up, UI Collective? So I just bought this table, and that gave me some inspiration that we should probably build a table component as part of our design system series. So today we're going to build a table component in Figma. Let's rock and roll.
All right, so what we're going to do first is we're actually going to build the table cell items. So we're building out the items that are going to go into our cell that are going to build our larger components. And this is why we're only focusing on table components today, because they can be pretty confusing. So we're going to go through it together. And again, if that doesn't make sense right now, bear with us. It'll all make sense. So what we're going to start off by doing is, again, the items that are going to go into our cell. So when you think about your table components as a whole, of course, you always have the ability to change things on a cell by cell level. Think about a table where at the end of the table, you might have specific actions. This is where you're toggling what is going to be in that cell. So these are going to be our cell items. And I hope that makes sense. So let's start off with just our basic copy. So let's maybe just go copy. Let's set this to our body medium, our text body. Let's go ahead and add some auto layout here. We're going to remove the horizontal padding altogether, and we're going to adjust the vertical padding to 2. And you're probably asking, is that looks like a pretty small cell? And the reason why we're doing it this way is because these are the items that go into our cell. So we're still going to build the cell item itself, but these are just the items that go into that larger cell, and you'll see why we make that approach relatively shortly. So this is going to be our dot items. Let's go ahead, create the component of this, and now let's go ahead and add a variance. And I hope everyone likes seeing my face, by the way, when I do this. I got a comment that I get way more subscribers when I show my face. So here we are. We're now some fun with some content coming up. So this is where we get into all of our different variants here. So we're going to change property 1 to our status, or this here is going to be our basic copy. And then we're also going to have a heading. So this is going to be, if you think about the first row of your table where you sort of have the labels for the columns, this is what these are going to be. So this is going to be our heading. And we're going to change the text here from our body medium to our body medium semi-bold. It's just slightly larger. And again, this is the approach that we're taking. If you want to do something completely different for your heading, use a different style of font, you can totally do that. So then let's go ahead and do our icon and copy. This is going to be our icon and copy. And actually, let's go maybe that an ampersand. And let's go ahead and search our assets, and let's be sure to pull in an icon. If this will load, central icon system. And let's maybe, what's a good icon that we want to use? Maybe just an arrow. I don't know, something like that might work. Or chevron. Let's look for our small one, and let's just bring that inside, and we can maybe adjust the gap here. Maybe set it a little bit larger, something like 4. And of course, we're always going to want to add our instant swap property. So let's just say icon. There we go. So let me just do a quick check here. So again, then I can easily adjust that icon. The reason why we're not hiding the icon is because if we hide the icon, then we just have the copy. And it's just for best practices. If you're only using copy, you want to use the copy. If you're using an icon and copy, you're going to want to use the icon and copy. So there we go. I was going to adjust this radius a bit, something like 2. And of course, let's go ahead and adjust the color. Icon primary, rock and roll. All right, so then let's go ahead and do our checkbox. This will be our checkbox. So let's go ahead and pull in our checkbox components. Oops, this is going to be our local components that we built before. There we go. So let's bring in our checkbox. And that looks a little large. And this is where you can get into some different types of sizes for your checkbox. So if I go back to my checkbox itself, our checkboxes already are a little large. So if you want to go back and add a smaller checkbox, you're more than welcome to do so. What we're going to do right now, again, this is just for demo purposes. We're just going to shrink this down. So we're just going to scale it down. There we go. Just to make it 24, just a little bit smaller. Again, that's not best practice. I do not suggest doing that. This is just for the purposes of this exercise. So go back to that checkbox component, add a smaller variant. What is size of this? Maybe 16 by 16 might be a decent size for your smaller size of checkbox. But again, what I do not do, what I just did, that is not best practice. So maybe we'll set that gap to 4 as well. And then This is going to be our checkbox and copy. Checkbox and copy. And this is just going to be our checkbox. So forgive what I just did there. So that's going to be our checkbox. And then let's bring in our icon. So this is going to be our plain icon. And let's just get rid of that text then. So then we just have our icon. Make sure I did this right. So icon and copy, our checkbox and copy. Maybe we won't use an ampersand. We'll just use a plus. There we go. This is our icon. And then we're going to go with a double icon as well. So with our icon, it's going to be our double icon. Again, you can also have a triple icon if you really need to. And maybe we'll just do another arrow from our central icon system. Maybe not a chevron this time, maybe like an arrow right. Again, it doesn't really matter. There we go. So then now we've got to add some properties here. So we have our icon, and we can't just go ahead and add that same instance because it's going to default us to that basic. That is going to default us to the original icon. And again, you won't have an instance swap available at both icons then. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new instance swap and just call this second icon. And be sure to change that to our icon primary. There we go. So now I have our icon. Maybe we can change these labels. Our icon 1. Let's change our properties here. And we'll leave it for now. Anyways, then let's go with our underline copy. So our copy underline. So what we're going to do here is we're really just going to go from our body medium to our body medium link. There we go. Let's make sure we have our applied. There we go. And then we're going to work with our status. So with our status, what this is really just going to be is we're going to add a little ellipse here. And maybe we'll set this to our icon success, copy, and just paste that inside, reposition, and let's maybe adjust the gap to something like 4 or something like 6. Oops, there we go. So there we have all of our cell items that are going to go into our broader cell. Let's just make sure we did this right. So we have our copy, we have our heading, we have our icon and copy, we have our checkbox, we have our checkbox and copy, we have our icon, we have our double icon, we have our underline, and then we have our status. Now, here are just some examples for items that are common table cell items that you might have within your table. Again, but this list is not all encompassing. You might have tags in here. You might have other types of components. It really depends on your table's use case and what the data that's going to be inside of it. So again, these are just some examples to get us started. And next, what we're going to look at is actually putting these items inside of a cell. Okay, so now that we have our cell items, let's go ahead and build out that broader cell. Now, a couple of housekeeping items right away. Is I realized I did forget, I accidentally called our property 1 our status instead of type. Status would not make sense in this case, so I went ahead and changed that to type. And the other thing I realized I forgot to do as well is we didn't add a text property for anywhere where there's that copy. So what we can do is we can select the text in that first variant, use the multi-select tool to select all the text, and then go ahead and add in that text property that we'll call label. So now on an instance, I can see that I can easily adjust that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start building out our cell itself. So with that instance, I'm going to go ahead and add some auto layouts. So let's call this our .cell, because again, we don't want to publish our .cell, or we don't want to publish our cell components. We only want to publish the table component. So we're going to call that our .cell with the dot. We'll stop it from being published. Let's then adjust the padding here. So horizontal padding to 16, and the vertical padding to 12. Now, what's one thing that you noticed when I did that is that the width of the cell did not actually change. And I can see here, maybe if I change the label to copy text, a little bit of a better example, is that the text is extending beyond its frame itself. So let's do some adjustments here. So let's go ahead, set this to hug, and let's set the cell item to hug as well. There we go. Let's go ahead and create the component of this, bring out a symbol for testing, and let's go ahead and add in our nested instances, our main component. And there I can see we can access the properties on our cell items themselves. And then if I was to extend this out, I notice here that the copy text, it doesn't go in the middle. It always stays left aligned, which is exactly what we want to have happen. And that's because our alignment is set to align top left. But I'm just going to set it to align left in the middle. There we go. So I think we're looking pretty good with our item. Let's do some tests here. So we have our icon copy, we have our icon, we have our double icon, so on and so forth. I think we're in some pretty good shape. Okay, so we have our cell, but there's actually some variants that we're going to work with our cell itself, and they're all specific to the border. So this is going to be none, this is going to be bottom, and then this here is going to be full. Now, it's not as simple as you might think. So let's go ahead and add variants here. And our property one is really just going to be called border. So it's not going to be called status, it's not going to be called type, it's just border. So let's give ourselves some breathing room. There we go. Let's bring that up. Bring this off to the side. Put that over there. Okay, so with our bottom border, as you guessed it, let me change variant 2 to bottom. So with our bottom border, I mean, you guessed exactly what it is really where there's just a bottom border. So it's going to be on the outside of our border width of 1 pixel. This is going to be our border primary. There we go. And then our full. So it's not going to be all the way around. What it's actually going to be, if we set this to custom, is actually going to be on the left, the right, and nothing at the top. And that's going to be our full variance. Let me make sure this is set to the outside, which it is. Perfect. And the reason this is why we don't need one at the top is if I take a bottom and a full, and I place one above the other, is all of a sudden our full, when placed below any of our variants, really, either the bottom or the full, again, the none wouldn't really apply in this case, is always going to have that top border. It's just going to be associated with the cell item that's above it. So that's why we don't need that top border at the full level itself. So let's just do some quick checks here. So we have our default. Sorry, this should be our none, not our default. There we go. Our none. So we have our border none. We have our border bottom. And then we have our border full. Let me just do some quick checks here. Is a 1 pixel on the outside. And this 2 is also on the outside with our border primaries. Beautiful. So there we have our cell itself. And what we're going to look at next is actually using our cell to piece together our rows and our columns, and a lot of the nuances associated with that. Okay, so now that we have our items and our cell, let's go ahead and use our cell to actually piece together our rows and our columns. We're going to start off with our rows. Let's bring in a bottom here. And what we're going to do is really just copy and paste this 12 times. So copy or add to, add some auto layout. We're going to set that gap to 0. Let's call this our dot row. And then simply copy and paste this 12 times. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. And this is where your tables, the logistics of them can kind of be a little bit confusing depending on your brand or how you like to set up your tables. In my rows, I always like to have 12 items, but again, that might be overkill. You might not need that many. So what you can do is actually just go ahead in the layers here. And I realize that my face might be hiding when I do this, but that's just learning curve. So they show my face for the first time as I do this. So there we have our dot row. And again, with more cells hidden in those layers. All right, let's go ahead and create the component of this. And let's go ahead then and add a variant. So with our row variants, we're really only going to have 3 for now. And let's go ahead and bring down one of these tags here. And this is going to be our default. And then this here is going to be our hover. And then we're also going to have a selected. There we go. So let's change property 1 to our status. This here is going to be our default, and make sure that D is lowercase. And then for our hover, what we're going to do is we're going to add a fill at the variant level itself. So not at the cell by cell level, but at the variant level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the hover, add a fill, and we're going to change that to our surface action hover 2. There we go. So that's an example of a row that's in a hover state. And then for our selected, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and copy a default, which is going to be our selected. spell selected right, or selected. And then we're going to add a fill, which is going to be our surface action. And we'll change our text body to our text on action itself. So then if I bring out a symbol of our row for testing, I can see we have our defaults, we have our hover, and then we also have the selected for our row. So there we go. There we have our row. Let me just do a quick check here, and then we can see if I can toggle on more cells that it retains that fill property. Beautiful. Awesome. So let's go ahead then and just hide. So those again. All right, so we have our default, we have our hover, we have our selected for our row. I think our row is in some pretty good shape here. Next, what we're going to go ahead and do is actually look at building out our columns. Okay, so now that we have our row, let's go ahead and look at building out our column. So it's a very similar approach, but instead of going horizontally as we did the row, we're going to go vertically. So let's take two, drop the gap between all of them. We're going to call this our dot column. And let's add 12, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. Let's go ahead and create the component of this and then copy a symbol for testing. So when it comes to your columns, you're always going to need a heading. You know, what type of data is this? Is this a first name? Is it a last name? Is it a user ID? Is it a date created? Is it like something like a net worth? Whatever it is, you're always going to need a heading. Now, I actually always like to have my headings inside my columns itself. It's way easier in terms of like scalability as you're working out through your table component. Having your headings in your columns saves you a massive headache in the future. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to adjust this first column here from our copy to our heading, and that's going to make that text bold. Now, this is just the look and feel that I went for. Depending on the look and feel for your table components or your brand, you might want that heading to be a little bit different. And also to add some separation, I'm also going to add a fill, and we're going to set this to our surface disable just to have that heading gray. Okay, so then let's go ahead and change this here to our heading, and maybe let's hide some by default, but first let's go ahead and expose those nested instances. Again, when it comes to table components, I do see a lot of times where those nested instances are not toggled on just because you're working with so many cells, but just in terms of best practice, I'm going to go ahead and add those. And then if we want to hide some of these by default, we just simply do so in our layers, as you see there, but maybe I should do it to the master components. Yeah, I'll do that. And sorry, I do know that my face is probably hiding my actions that I'm taking here, but I have no way to move that camera on the fly. So maybe let's start off with 6 for now. And you know, you think that we have our column all done, and we're actually not going to work with variants for our column. It's because it's very unusual to have like a hover effect for your column. I mean, you can if you want to. There's nothing stopping you. We're just not going to do it now because it is pretty uncommon. Usually the variants, like the status level statuses, come for the row and not the column itself. Okay, so what we're going to do then is let's look at a quick example. So let's say you have, you know, a table here. So let's copy a couple columns. Let's say this is sample table. I want to show you a sort of a unique nuance associated with your columns. As if we extend this sample table out, and we just set these to fill, and let's go ahead and create the component of this. So let's copy in a symbol for testing. Is what if this is maybe something like a description, and this is some text. So copy text goes here, goes here. So notice how there's some overlap. And naturally, when you're working with a table, you don't want every single column to have the same width. You know, you're going to have some columns that have a little bit of a different type of data. You know, a first name or a date created might be a little bit smaller, but a description or a name might be a little bit larger. So when you have your table components, there's currently no way to adjust the width of that column unless you actually go ahead and detach that table itself. Now, detaching components is never recommended, but again, Figma is not built to work with tables. You know, Figma is not an app designed around data tables. Designers, when they're building data tables, they kind of just go ahead and make it work. So oftentimes what I do see a lot of is actually detaching and then just manually adjusting as you need to. Again, not recommended, but if you do that, that's totally fine. Again, Figma is not built to handle data tables. But For those more advanced and those really looking to, flex to their boss or other designers about how awesome they can set up their tables, there is a little bit of a hack associated with this, and that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so now let's look at that a little bit of a more advanced technique that will actually allow us to adjust the width of those columns on an individual basis without needing to detach the table itself. And again, this is a massive flex as a designer, being able to do this, being able to show this off. So it's a great trick to show in an interview or whatever it is. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and just copy and paste this. So add an ellipse and move it all the way to the top. Let's then copy that same ellipse, and let's add some auto layout between the two. And we're going to set these to our horizontal instead of vertical in the auto layout. Then we're going to call this first ellipse our start point, and then we're going to call this our end point. And then we're going to call this our adjust gap, because it's actually going to be the gap between these two elements that is going to define the width of that column. How exciting. So then what we're going to do is, because of course you don't want to see these within your table itself, we're going to select our start and end point and just basically make them visible. So 0 and 0. So they're there, you just can't tell that they're there. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of our element here, and we're going to adjust the gap. So let's maybe adjust it upwards. And as I'm adjusting the gap, let me zoom in here, is you can actually see that the width between the two, it's a little bit visual. And now you're probably wondering, why is my column not reacting? It is because here what we need to do is set it to hug. So there you can see how that adjusts. So if I actually want to go ahead and adjust the width of any of these columns, you can simply go into your layers to that column specifically and actually go ahead and adjust that gap. How exciting. Is that not an awesome Figma trick? So sorry, I'm a total nerd when it comes to that, but it sort of allows you on the column by column basis to simply go ahead and adjust the gap. And also this also needs to be set to hug. Again, working with your table, you might need to flip between fill and hug depending on the use case. Again, Figma is not built to work with tables. So again, you can adjust the gap at any of your columns to modify the width and customize the table according to the data within it. So how exciting. So let's go ahead and delete that. And there we have our column, our dot column component. So just as a recap thus far, so we have our cell items, we have our cell, we have our rows, we have our columns. I think we're looking in some pretty good shape. So I think what we're going to do next is actually go ahead and start to piece together that table component. All right, so now that we have our cell items, our cells, our rows, and our columns, let's go ahead and piece together our table component. So let's start off with our row. So let's go ahead and maybe just show a couple more here just to get visual. And what we're going to do is really just going to copy and paste this, same as we did before. So add an auto layout frame and just maybe set this to like, I don't know, something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 times is fine. Again, you can go ahead and add more if you need to, and then just show and hide them in your layers as you see fit. But this is what we're going to rock with for now. We're just going to call this our content data, whatever it is that seems to be working. Now, when it comes to your row itself, one thing I always like to do here is just go on the individual level, because as we did with our columns, is we're always going to need that header itself. So with the row level, we don't have that header, so we're going to go ahead and add it. Now, this is where one thing that you can do if you do want to get a little bit fancy is you can go back in at the cell level. Oops, that's not what I wanted to happen. You can go back in at the cell level, and let's add another variant here. So let's add another variant that we're going to call our type. So these here are going to be our defaults. And then maybe these are going to be your default. And then maybe you have another that's going to be your heading, type heading. And then with these, what it's going to be is it's really just going to be that heading text, and then that heading text. And then we can go ahead and add in that surface, that fill, which is going to be a surface disabled surface disable. There we go. So now in our row, what we can do here is we can really just adjust. So the type is currently set to default. And then if we change it to heading, we can see that adjusts with it. Now, look what happens when, again, we're covering a whole bunch of nuances associated with tables here where designers get stuck. So I'm probably going to weave in and out of different concepts. So forgive me. So if we set this to, fixed as an example, or even when let me undo that. So even when we set that row, all of these to heading, and that font gets a little bit bigger. So when that font gets bigger, naturally, all of a sudden is the width of your cells gets a little bit larger, and it actually extends the heading a little bit too far left. Is what we need to do that is we need to go back into the row itself and set all of these items to fill. So when we set them to fill, look what happens. All of a sudden, they get a little bit more in line. So set these to fill. And again, a big emphasis when you're working with table components is that they're never going to be perfect. You're always going to try to get them as close to perfect as possible, but I promise you, your tables will never, ever, ever, ever be perfect. Okay, so I think we're in some pretty decent shape there. I can see that those elements are already in line. Next, what we're going to go ahead and do is look at adding in our pagination and also our heading. All right, now let's go ahead and add in, let's say, our pagination and also our heading, and to spruce up this table just a little bit. So let's go into our layers here, and we have our pagination component that we built in an earlier part of this episode, or earlier part of this series. I want to say this is maybe episode 3, but it could be episode 4. I don't remember off the top of my head. And let's go from jumper, and let's change that back. Let's go jumper, and then let's show results. Again, just to spruce things up a bit, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add some auto layout here, and we're going to call this our pagination. And then let's go ahead and select our content, our pagination, add some auto layout, and we're going to set our pagination frame to fill. And then what we're going to do is then set this to also fill. Beautiful. So then what we can do, so there's no padding there. We have the padding around our pagination component, which is exactly what we want to see. Maybe let's check our gap. Maybe we adjust that gap to 12. And then what we're going to do also is let's add in a heading. So let's call this our heading, medium semi-bold. Maybe we'll set this like an H5. Let's see what happens. H5. So maybe we just call this our user data. User data, just to give it a little bit of a realistic name. Let's go ahead and add some auto layout here, and then let's bring inside that frame and position it all the way to the top. Let's set that to fill, left align that, and set that to fill as well. And we're going to call this our heading. There we go. And maybe let's also add a stroke. Let's call this our table. Let's go ahead and call this our stroke. It's going to be on the outside. Apply a variable. It's going to be our border width of 1. It's going to be our border primary. And let's also then go ahead and apply a radius. Let's say the radius to 4. Sorry, I really do need to scope my color variables. So then let's go ahead and make sure I did notice this. This is going to be our body headings, our text headings. There we go. There we go. So that's our text headings. Maybe I want to adjust the gap here a little bit. So let's maybe set this to 12. Let's check. Try to get this in close to in line as possible. 16. Let's maybe set this to 14. 15. I think that's close enough. Whatever works. Okay, so we have our table component. I think it's looking half decent for now. Maybe it's also a little bit too big. That might be too small. Anyways, I'm getting really picky here. Maybe if you want to adjust the top to 16, give us some more breathing room on that top. I think that's better. Maybe if we go set this to even 20, I think that's even better. Again, sorry, I'm just getting picky right now. So let's go ahead and create the component of this, and let's make some modifications here. So maybe we want to hide this pagination. So we're going to add in a layer that we're going to call our pagination. So when we do that, and then we hide that pagination, we can see that everything is still nice and snug. All right, so then let's go ahead with the top as well. But first, maybe we want to add, let's go just add a layer property here for the heading. Our heading. And then I can also turn that on and off. And then there we have our row table with some pagination and also our heading. Next, what we're going to do is actually look at doing the same, but for our columns. All right, so we have our table component using rows now. So next is what we're going to do is we're going to look at building out in columns. And so let's go ahead. How many did I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Kind of a weird number, but it is what it is. But the first thing that we're going to want to do here is with this first cell is remember how earlier on in the video, we went ahead and actually created another type variant for our cell itself. So this is we're actually going to override what we did with the column a little bit earlier on, just as an example. Just that's not best practice, and we're just going to set that to our heading, and there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead then and copy and paste, and until we get 9. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. And then this is going to be our content or data, whatever it is that you want to call it. And then let's go ahead and simply just bring one of these down as we did before and simply just reposition. Do the same here, reposition. And next, let's go ahead and select all, add some auto layout. Let's check the gap that we had here. So the gap is going to be set to 12. And then let's go ahead and call this our table columns. And I'll show you how we can combine these into variants as well, if you'd like to, a little bit later on. And let's then go ahead and create the component of this. There we go. And we'll bring that down. And now let's go ahead and add in some of our variables here for our pagination on our main component, our variables, our properties. So this is our pagination, but it's not on this component, it's on the other component. So let's detach that, call this our pagination. And now on this instance here, I have our pagination that we can hide. And then let's also go ahead and do the same at the top. So I can see that heading is missing because it's on the other components. Let's detach that, add a new layer property for our heading. And now I can turn this on and off as well. But we also do need to add in our stroke, which is going to be 1 pixel on the outside. Let's go ahead and apply that variable, border width of 1, border primary, and set the radius here, radius of 4. There we go. I think we're in some decent shape. Then I can turn on and off that heading as I need to. Beautiful. Okay, so there we have our table and our table columns. Now, if you wanted to combine these as variants, you can just simply select both and then select combine as variants. And you can call these our tables. And then this will be our type. And then this might be your row. And then this might be your column. And then there's another instance too, if you do want to start to combine some of those tables, especially if you have a bunch of different variants of your tables, but depending on the particular use case, again, maybe you want to have one where you have actions like preloaded on that right-hand side. That's where that can come into play as another variant. We're not going to look at today. That might get a little bit too brand specific, but hopefully you have a good idea of what I mean. And again, if you have any questions on that, just feel free to ask those in our forum. But we're not done just yet, as there is still one thing I would like to do, which is to truncate our text. Okay, now let's look at text truncation. So when it comes to text truncation, let's just say here we have, it's like a user ID that we're prepared is going to be a little bit longer, 6, 7, 8, something like that. Instead of it bleeding into that next row, one thing you can do is truncate that text. So let's go into the cell item level itself, use multi-select, hit these 3 dots here, your type settings, set that to truncate. And then if we go back here, you'll notice that it still hasn't adjusted. And that's because we need to adjust the resizing here to auto height. And I can see that now all of our text has that truncation itself. And the reason why this looks the way that it does is just because our table is pretty small. It's only 955 pixels. So that's just how you can go ahead and actually go and truncate some of that text that you might need to. You can play around with some settings there as you see fit. So that's how you can truncate some of your text for your tables. So again, you don't have text bleeding into other cells. What we're going to look at next, actually some troubleshooting if you do need to adjust the width of any of your columns within the table. Okay, so next let's go ahead and actually look at how we can troubleshoot some elements with our column. When I've talked to designers this in the past, this is often something that would come up a little bit later on. So I just want to make sure I cover it with everyone here today. Okay, so let's go into the middle here and maybe just bring back that concept of like a user ID, and what we're going to do is use our adjust gap here, and let's try to make this a little bit larger. And you'll notice that when you try to use our adjust gap, that nothing's happening. And again, that's because we need to set our column to hug. So when we set our column to hug, all of a sudden our adjust gap works as planned. But what's one thing that we notice now is that all of a sudden is our table or the data or content or data, whatever you want to call it, within our table is all of a sudden bleeding beyond the fold. And this is where you need to select all the other columns here, and now all of a sudden set these to fill. So you really do need to play around with your resizing properties when you're working with your table component. And again, a big emphasis is that your table component will never, ever, ever be perfect. You're going to try to get it as close to perfect as possible, but this is where some collaboration between yourself as the designer and your development team needs to happen, where they know that, table components within Figma are buggy. Figma was not built to handle these big table components. So there are going to be some errors when you're working with your table components. They will never, ever, ever be perfect. But again, we're going to try to get them as close to perfect as possible. All right, there we go. And there we have our completed table component. Now, one thing I did forget to do is if I add a background color to our canvas, and look what happens, is that our component is see-through, and that's just because I didn't add a fill to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a surface primary, and that's going to fix that issue. So there we go. Don't forget to add your fill at the component level. Now, you can also add it at the cell level as well if you'd like to. I just prefer to add it at the component level. So don't forget to add that.
What's going on, everyone? Thanks for watching today's video. I just want to encourage everyone here just to please hit that subscribe button. Your support goes a really long way. And also, too, to check out our community forum where we're answering any design question. We're having the community answer your design questions, whether it's on accessibility, stakeholder management, design feedback, and everything in between. We also have a lot of fun initiatives coming up, such as design challenges and more. We actually, as of today, partnered with Untitled UI to get our community members soon 20% off Untitled UI, which is one of the most popular Figma kits available. So be sure to come back for that, and lots more great content on the way as part of our design system series, how to get hired as a designer, and so much more. So thanks again for watching today's video, and see you soon.